For weeks, the eyes of the world have been fixed on the narrowest stretch of water on Earth, a corridor just 21 miles wide at its tightest point, separating the coast of Iran from the shores of Oman. Through that sliver of sea, roughly one-fifth of all the oil and natural gas that keeps the global economy breathing has historically moved every single day. And right now, that corridor is at the center of the most dangerous military and economic confrontation the modern world has ever seen. When ceasefire talks between the United States and Iran collapsed in Islamabad, Pakistan, after more than 20 hours of negotiations led by Vice President J.D. Vance, any remaining hope for a quick diplomatic resolution was extinguished. Iran refused to concede on its nuclear ambitions. The United States refused to allow Tehran to retain control of the world's most critical maritime chokepoint. And with those two positions irreconcilable, President Donald Trump made an announcement that reverberated across global markets, military commands, and foreign ministries from Beijing to Brussels. Effective from 10 in the morning on the 13th of April, the United States Navy would begin enforcing a blockade, targeting all vessels entering or departing Iranian ports and coastal areas, anywhere along the Arabian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, and the Arabian Sea east of the strait. The age of Iran wielding the Strait of Hormuz as its most powerful geopolitical weapon was, at least in Washington's calculation, now over. But how did we get here, and what does it truly mean for the world? Everything was set in motion 2 days before the blockade announcement, on the 11th of April. Two American guided missile destroyers, the USS Frank E. Peterson Jr. and the USS Michael Murphy, did something that no United States warship had done since the conflict with Iran began more than 6 weeks earlier. They transited the Strait of Hormuz, not quietly, not with their tracking system switched off as military vessels typically operate. These ships deliberately turned on their automatic identification systems, the electronic beacons that make vessels visible to the whole world, on the far side of the strait, in a calculated signal to Tehran, to the global shipping industry, and to every nation watching. The message was unmistakable. American warships can and will sail through these waters. Iran's response came swiftly and with undisguised ferocity. A radio transmission cut through the silence of the Arabian Gulf with words that will likely be remembered long after this crisis is resolved. Final warning, final warning, final warning. U.S. Navy warship, this is Iran Navy Station. You must alter course and return to the Indian Ocean immediately. A U.S. Navy crew member responded, stating the ship was conducting transit passage in full accordance with international law. The Iranian commander replied that he was issuing a last warning and added words that sent a chill through every naval officer monitoring the exchange, that any warship in the vicinity should be prepared for immediate action with no further notice. The confrontation did not escalate into fire that day, but the transmission confirmed what had long been understood. Iran considered the Strait of Hormuz its sovereign domain and was prepared to defend that position with lethal force. Iran's actions in the weeks leading up to this moment had been a masterclass in asymmetric maritime coercion. Since the United States and Israel launched their joint strikes on Iran on the 28th of February, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and severely degrading the country's military infrastructure, Iran had responded by turning the Strait of Hormuz into a weapon. The IRGC shut the waterway to most commercial traffic, launched more than 20 confirmed attacks on merchant vessels, and began laying sea mines in the strait, triggering what energy analysts at the International Energy Agency have described as the worst energy shock the world has ever witnessed. Worse, they say, than the oil crises of the 1970s and the disruptions caused by the war in Ukraine combined. With the ceasefire now on fragile ground, Iran has not confined its maritime aggression to Hormuz alone. It has activated its regional proxy network, drawing the Houthi movement in Yemen back into the conflict, escalating attacks on commercial shipping in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the other great choke point of Middle Eastern seaborne trade at the southern end of the Red Sea. Two critical corridors, two active fronts. The pressure on global energy supply is cascading outward in every direction. Now let us look at what the U.S. blockade is actually up against in the strait itself, because the picture is not a simple one of overwhelming American naval power facing down a defeated adversary. Iran, despite 6 weeks of devastating strikes, retains a formidable asymmetric fighting force in those shallow, narrow waters. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy has spent decades building a doctrine specifically designed to neutralize the advantages of a technologically superior opponent. Their fleet of small, fast attack craft, including Boghammer, Zulfiqar, and Ashura-class vessels, numbers in the hundreds and can reach speeds of 50 knots. These boats carry heavy machine guns and rocket launchers, and they are designed to swarm. The IRGC has also discussed plans to deploy several hundred long-range kamikaze drones, including variants of the Shahed series, capable of overwhelming ship-borne air defense systems through sheer volume and simultaneity. Below the surface, the threat is perhaps even more insidious. Iran has been laying sea mines throughout the strait since the war began. Moored mines, magnetic mines, mines that drift with the ocean currents, mines whose precise locations, once released into those unpredictable waters, are nearly impossible to pin down, even with modern surveillance technology. The narrowest stretch of Hormuz, just 21 miles across, means that the distance between a U.S. destroyer and a field of these drifting explosives can be measured not in safe nautical miles but in desperate, lethal meters. This is the battlefield into which the United States Central Command has now committed its forces. The U.S. military is not walking into this conflict blind. It is the most sophisticated fighting force on Earth, and it has prepared extensively for exactly this scenario. The first pillar of America's tactical response in the strait is the A-10 Thunderbolt, the legendary close air support aircraft known as the Warthog, whose enormous nose-mounted 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon can deliver withering, sustained fire against fast-moving surface targets. The number of A-10s deployed in the region has reportedly increased significantly since the conflict began, and these aircraft are now patrolling at extremely low altitudes over the strait, providing a persistent airborne threat to any Iranian small boat operation. Against a swarm of speedboats trying to overwhelm a destroyer, the Warthog is uniquely suited. Nothing else in the American inventory combines its loitering capability, its durability, and its raw destructive power against unarmored surface targets at close range. But the threat in this fight is not only the small boats on the surface. Hidden deep inside the rugged, cave-riddled mountains along Iran's Hormuz coastline are hundreds of mobile anti-ship missile launchers and concealed drone launch facilities. Sites so hardened and so well camouflaged that even satellite reconnaissance struggles to locate them all. The missiles those sites carry, including domestically developed anti-ship variants with ranges that cover the entirety of the strait, represent an existential threat to even the largest American warships. If Iran were to fire a coordinated salvo of cruise missiles or ballistic anti-ship missiles at a carrier strike group operating in those confined waters, the results could be catastrophic. This is where the strategic bombers enter the calculation. The U.S. has deployed B-52 Stratofortresses and B-1 Lancer supersonic bombers to support operations in the region, operating out of bases including RAF Fairford in the United Kingdom and Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. These aircraft carry the most powerful conventional bunker-busting munitions in the American arsenal, precision-guided penetrating bombs capable of reaching and destroying deeply buried underground facilities. The U.S. military's strategic approach in Hormuz is brutally simple and brutally clear. Rather than trying to intercept every missile or drone once it is airborne, destroy the launchers, the command centers, and the radar installations before they can fire. Strike the archer directly, not the arrow in flight. Obliterate the capacity to threaten, and the threat itself evaporates. This calculus is well understood in Tehran. Iranian commanders know that the moment their first anti-ship missile is launched at a U.S. warship, it will invite a response of overwhelming and potentially civilization-ending air power. Every missile battery revealed becomes a target. Every radar installation that lights up becomes a target. Every command post that transmits a targeting order becomes a target. The knowledge of that reality is, in theory, a powerful deterrent. But deterrence requires both sides to remain rational under extreme pressure, and extreme pressure has a way of producing decisions that pure logic would never sanction. There remains one gap in America's apparent dominance. In the dark, shallow, chaotic waters of Hormuz, where electronic interference is constant and the surface is cluttered with small craft, a single kamikaze drone flying low and slow, or a single cruise missile skimming just above the wave surface beneath radar coverage, could still find its way to the hull of a billion-dollar destroyer. One hit, one damaged ship, and the calculus shifts dramatically. Iran's entire swarm doctrine is not designed to win a conventional engagement. It is designed to make the cost of maintaining the blockade politically and militarily unsustainable over time. And below the waves, even as American autonomous underwater vehicles and mine clearance assets work around the clock to sweep the corridor, Iran's rudimentary but effective mine network continues to pose a threat that cannot be entirely neutralized from the air. The mine problem is one of the key reasons the blockade operation carries such inherent risk, and why even retired American admirals have described it as an act of war with consequences that are genuinely hard to predict. While the military confrontation at the Strait dominates the headlines, there is a parallel battle being fought on an entirely different plane, one that may ultimately prove even more consequential than any exchange of fire between warships. In the weeks before the blockade was announced, Iran had already fundamentally altered the terms of global energy trade at Hormuz. Rather than simply closing the strait, Tehran had begun operating it as a toll booth, charging vessels up to $2 million per transit, with payments accepted in Chinese yuan routed through Chinese banking infrastructure outside the Western financial system, or in cryptocurrency, including Bitcoin and dollar-pegged stablecoins, routed through digital networks entirely beyond the reach of American sanctions enforcement. Iran's parliament formally codified this system in late March, and by early April, TRM Labs and Chainalysis, leading blockchain analytics firms, estimated that the toll collection mechanism could generate up to $20 million per day from oil tankers alone. This is not simply about Iran extracting revenue. This is about something far more structurally significant. Iran was constructing, under the cover of a military crisis, a parallel financial architecture, a system of energy trade and payment that operates entirely outside the US dollar, outside the SWIFT banking system, and outside the financial enforcement mechanisms that have underpinned American global power for decades. And the country that stands at the center of that architecture is China. China is the world's largest importer of crude oil, consuming more than 11.5 million barrels per day to fuel its industrial economy. Approximately 40 to 50% of those imports flow through the Strait of Hormuz. China is also the overwhelming destination for Iran's oil exports, purchasing more than 80% of what Iran produces, according to commodity tracking firms, through a network of transactions that deliberately bypasses American sanctions using reflagging, ship-to-ship transfers, and payments in yuan and digital currencies rather than dollars. When Trump ordered the blockade of Iranian ports and declared that any vessel that had paid a toll to Iran would be intercepted in international waters, he was not only confronting Tehran. Whether he stated it explicitly or not, he was also placing a direct financial and logistical blockade on the energy supply lines feeding the Chinese economy, the economy of America's principal geopolitical rival. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi made Beijing's position immediately clear. Meeting with Gulf officials in Beijing on the day the blockade took effect, he stated publicly that blocking the Strait of Hormuz is not in the common interest of the international community and called for a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire through political and diplomatic means. These are the measured words of a government that is watching its energy security and its carefully constructed de-dollarization strategy simultaneously come under assault. The scenario that military strategists in every capital in the world are now gaming through is this. What happens if a large, Chinese-flagged oil tanker sails toward the blockade line? What does the U.S. Navy do? Does it stop and board a vessel flying the flag of the world's second-largest economy and a nuclear power? If it does, Beijing could characterize that act as a direct sovereign violation, a formal casus belli. If it does not, if it allows the Chinese ship to pass, then the entire credibility of the blockade collapses, and every nation that wants to challenge American maritime power has its template. The outcome of that moment, if it arrives, will not merely determine a news cycle. It could redraw the global balance of power for the next generation. It could influence whether China accelerates its timeline for operations against Taiwan. It could determine whether the de-dollarization project that Beijing and its partners have been assembling for years survives or collapses against the hull of an American destroyer. The Strait of Hormuz has always been the world's most important 21 miles of water. Today, it is something more than that. It is the arena in which the shape of the 21st century is being decided, in real time, under fire, with no certainty of outcome. The United States has taken the lock, but holding it may prove to be the hardest thing it has ever attempted. So the question that hangs over every decision-maker in Washington, Tehran, and Beijing right now is the same one that keeps the strategists awake at night. Can the U.S. truly maintain this blockade against Iran's asymmetric naval tactics? Against the pressure of surging global oil prices, against a coalition of nations desperate to get their energy supplies flowing again, and against the silent but immense economic and geopolitical weight of China? Or will the combination of Iran's guerrilla warfare at sea and Beijing's irresistible leverage transform this confrontation into something the architects of the blockade never intended, and the world cannot afford? What do you think? Leave your thoughts below.